My name is Minerva Orla, and I am 28 years old. My grandmother Beatrice was not even in the ground yet. The rain was lashing against the stained glass of an old granite church in Providence, Rhode Island. The air smelled like wet wool and lilies. My older sister Cassandra stepped up to the mahogany casket. She was 31 years old and wearing a stark white designer dress. She stood right next to me, leaned over the polished wood, and whispered to our father, "So does the lawyer have the checks today or tomorrow?" She thought she was walking away with a fortune that day. She did not know our grandmother had left me a locked brass box and a map designed specifically for the one daughter this family treated like a ghost. By the time this story is over, my sister will be on her knees in the mud, begging a sanitation department to help her find the inheritance she threw in the trash. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family golden child, take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories. But only if you know what it feels like to be the underdog. Drop your age in the comments right now. I want to know who is listening and where you are in life. Now let me take you back to that rainy Tuesday morning at the church reception. Growing up in the Orla house meant you knew your place. Cassandra performed. She was loud. She commanded the room. Our parents, Thomas and Evelyn, engineered their entire lives around her moods. I was the quiet one. I am a historical archivist. I spent my childhood weekends in library basements with Grandma Beatrice, tracing colonial ship logs and learning how to read between the lines. My family treated me like the hired help. I was the one who booked the caterers for this funeral. I was the one who picked out the flowers. Cassandra just showed up in white. The reception was held in the church hall. The caterers had not even finished setting up the coffee urns before Cassandra started. Aunts and uncles were standing in small groups, speaking in low voices. Cassandra tapped her designer heel against the linoleum. She looked at our father and crossed her arms. "I do not understand why Harrison is making us wait until tomorrow for the reading," she said. Her voice carried over the quiet room. "It is a simple distribution. He can hand over the checks right now." I looked at her. I told her to lower her voice. "I said we are at a funeral, Cassandra." She turned her head slowly. She looked at my plain black dress. Then she laughed. It was that sharp, rehearsed laugh she used when she wanted an audience. "Oh, Minerva," she said, "do not play the grieving widow. We all know you are just waiting to see if Grandma left you enough to finally move out of that tiny apartment. Maybe you can buy some clothes that do not smell like old library books." Two of my cousins standing nearby chuckled. I looked at my mother. Evelyn just touched Cassandra on the arm and murmured a soft, "Shh," but she did not correct her. My father, Thomas, did not even look up from his phone. They let it happen. They always let it happen. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face blank. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I just stood there and absorbed the humiliation while 30 people pretended not to watch. I let them think they held all the power. I let Cassandra stand there in her white dress feeling like a queen. Because I knew something they did not. The loudest person in the room is rarely the smartest. And the quiet ones are always keeping score. The day after the funeral, the rain stopped, but the air in Providence remained heavy and damp. We gathered in the law office of Harrison Cole, my grandmother's estate attorney. The office was located in a restored colonial building on Benefit Street. The room smelled of old leather lemon oil and the faint scent of stale coffee. Harrison Cole sat behind a massive mahogany desk. He was a man in his late 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses who spoke with the precision of a surgeon. He had been Grandma Beatrice's attorney for 30 years. He knew the family dynamic just as well as I did. My parents, Thomas and Evelyn, sat on a tufted leather sofa, looking expectant. Evelyn smoothed her skirt while Thomas adjusted his watch. Cassandra sat in a high-backed wing chair. She was out of the white funeral dress and into a tailored black suit that looked like it belonged on a corporate brochure. Her designer bag was perched on her lap. She was literally tapping her foot against the Persian rug. The sound was a rhythmic, impatient thud that echoed in the quiet room. I sat in a straight-back chair near the window, watching the dust motes drift in the pale morning light. Harrison cleared his throat and opened a thick, cream-colored folder. "We are here for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Beatrice Margaret Orla," he began. His voice was calm, measured, and completely devoid of sentiment. "Can we skip the legal preamble?" Cassandra interrupted. Her foot stopped tapping. She leaned forward. "I have a flight back to New York tonight. Let us just get to the distributions. I assume you have the checks ready." My father nodded in agreement. "We appreciate your thoroughness, Harrison, but it has been a difficult week. If we could expedite this." Harrison looked at Cassandra over the rim of his glasses. The look was chilling. It was the look of a man who dealt in irrevocable facts, not tantrums. "I will proceed as instructed by my client," he said. His tone left no room for further argument. He began the reading. The initial bequests were minor. He distributed a few antique brooches to my mother, a set of vintage golf clubs, and a small savings bond to my father. Thomas and Evelyn exchanged a look of polite disappointment, but they clearly expected the bulk of the estate, the real money, to be divided between Cassandra and me, with Cassandra undoubtedly receiving the larger share. They were already calculating the numbers in their heads. Then Harrison turned a page. He reached under his desk and brought out a worn wooden box. The wood was dark cherry, scratched and chipped at the edges. He placed it carefully on the desk. "To my eldest granddaughter," Harrison read, "I leave my collection of personal recipes. They contain the true flavor of this family history." He slid the wooden box across the mahogany surface toward Cassandra. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Cassandra stared at the box. She did not reach for it. Her expression shifted from expectant to confused, and then to a dark flush of rage. "Recipes," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "She left me recipes." "That is correct," Harrison replied. Cassandra stood up. The chair scraped harshly against the floor. "Are you kidding me?" she yelled. She leaned over the desk, her hands planted flat on the surface. "Where is the trust fund? Where is the property distribution? She owned a house in Narragansett, for God's sake. I am the oldest granddaughter. She told me I was taken care of." Harrison remained entirely unbothered. He folded his hands. "You are receiving exactly what the document dictates, Cassandra." "She is senile," Cassandra shrieked. Turning to our parents, she gestured wildly at the box. "She was out of her mind the last 6 months. You know she was. She could not even remember my fiancé name. We are contesting this. Thomas, call your lawyer. This is a joke." Thomas looked uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. "Now, Cassandra, let us not jump to conclusions. Perhaps there is an explanation." Evelyn wrung her hands. "Harrison, surely there is a mistake. Beatrice always intended to provide for Cassandra." Harrison did not acknowledge their panic. He turned his attention to me. "Minerva," he said quietly. He reached into his desk drawer again. This time he brought out 2 items. First, a heavy brass box, slightly smaller than a shoebox, with an intricate antique lock on the front. Second, a thick roll of parchment tied with a faded ribbon. He placed them on the edge of the desk nearest to me. "To my youngest granddaughter, Minerva," Harrison read. "I leave this locked box and the accompanying chart. I leave them to you because you are the only one smart enough to find what they unlock." He held my gaze as he handed me the items. The brass box was heavy cold against my palms. The parchment felt thick and ancient. I untied the ribbon and unrolled a few inches. It was a hand-drawn map of Rhode Island, detailed with colonial landmarks and maritime coordinates. It was not a printed document. It was drawn in my grandmother's own precise script. Cassandra let out a sound that was half gasp, half snarl. She lunged across the space between us, reaching for the parchment. "What is that?" she demanded. "Let me see that map." I stepped back out of her reach and slid the map into the inner pocket of my coat. I held the brass box tightly against my chest. "No," I said. "It is mine." She turned her fury back on Harrison. "You let her manipulate a dying woman," Cassandra yelled, pointing a manicured finger at me. "She spent every weekend filling Grandma ahead with her boring historical nonsense. and now she gets the real inheritance. This is fraud. I am calling the police. I am suing this entire firm." The energy in the room was suffocating. My parents were murmuring in shocked tones, trying to calm Cassandra down while simultaneously glaring at me as if I had committed a crime. The dynamic was playing out exactly as it always did. Cassandra demanded the world, and when she did not get it, the family blamed me. But Harrison Cole had seen enough. He stood up. He did not shout, but his voice commanded absolute silence. "Cassandra," he said, cold and sharp as cracked ice. She stopped mid-rant, breathing heavily. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked down at the scratched wooden box sitting abandoned on his desk. "Cassandra, your grandmother was a very precise woman. She did not do things by accident. I strongly suggest you look closely at the value of what you have been given." Cassandra sneered. She grabbed her designer bag. "I do not want her stupid clam chowder instructions," she spat. "You can keep the garbage. I am getting my own lawyer." She turned on her heel and stormed out of the office. The heavy oak door slammed behind her with a finality that rattled the framed diplomas on the wall. My parents rushed out after her, apologizing profusely to Harrison over their shoulders. Evelyn cast one last disappointed look at me before disappearing into the hallway. I stood alone in the office with Harrison. The silence returned heavy and complex. He sat back down. He looked at me and offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Do not lose that map, Minerva," he said quietly. I clutched the brass box. I walked out of the office into the gray Providence morning, knowing the war had just begun. The air outside Harrison Cole office was thick with the threat of more rain. The colonial brick buildings lining Benefit Street looked like bruised purple silhouettes against the gray sky. I stepped out the heavy front doors, clutching the brass box against my chest. The metal was cool, but it felt like a living thing humming with unfinished business. I heard them before I saw them. Cassandra was standing near my father's car, a leased silver sedan that Thomas liked to pretend he owned outright. Her black heels were planted firmly on the wet asphalt. She was holding the scratched wooden recipe box in both hands. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Evelyn stood beside her, wringing her hands, while Thomas paced back and forth, talking on his phone in harsh, clipped tones. They saw me. The pacing stopped. The hand-wringing stopped. Cassandra marched toward me. Her eyes were dark and hard. She did not say a word. She just lifted the wooden box high above her head and brought it down on the pavement with every ounce of force she possessed. The crack of the wood splitting sounded like a gunshot in the damp air. The cherry wood shattered. Decades of Grandma Beatrice handwritten recipe cards spilled out, scattering across the wet asphalt. Dozens of index cards written in blue ink stained with butter and vanilla from countless Thanksgivings and birthdays fluttered into puddles. "That is what your precious grandmother thinks I am worth," Cassandra screamed. Her voice echoed off the historic brick facades. "Garbage! She left me garbage!" I looked at the cards soaking up the dirty puddle water. A sudden sharp ache flared behind my ribs. Those cards were the only tangible proof that Beatrice had ever tried to teach Cassandra anything real, and my sister had just destroyed them in a tantrum fit for a toddler. "You let her do this?" Cassandra yelled, taking another step toward me. "You sat there reading her those dusty books while I was actually building a life, and you manipulated her. You convinced a sick, old woman to hand over the estate to you. I did not convince her of anything," I said, my voice steady. I was holding the brass box tighter now, feeling the weight of the map folded in my inner coat pocket. "She gave you a gift, Cassandra. You just threw it in the mud." My father hung up his phone and stepped between us. His face was a tight mask of forced authority. He raised his hand, palm out, a gesture designed to command obedience. "Enough," Thomas said. "This has gone far enough. Minerva, you are going to hand those over right now." I stared at him. "Hand what over?" "The box and that map," he said, as if I had missed something obvious. "Your sister is upset." The family is upset. Your grandmother was clearly not of sound mind when she drafted those documents. We need to evaluate everything together. Hand them to me, Minerva. Do it now so we can sort this out and keep the peace. Keep the peace. Those 3 words were the cornerstone of the Orla family dynamic. Keep the peace meant let Cassandra have her way. Keep the peace meant swallow your feelings and make yourself smaller so Thomas did not have to deal with conflict. Keep the peace meant I was expected to surrender my inheritance in a wet parking lot simply because my sister was throwing a fit. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice placating and soft. Please, Minerva, do not make this harder than it needs to be. Just give them to your father. We will sort it all out at the house. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, holding out his hand, expectant and entitled. I looked at Cassandra glaring at me over the ruined recipe cards. For 28 years, I had handed over everything to keep the peace. I had stepped back from conversations I had taken the smaller bedroom I had accepted being an afterthought. Not today. No, I said. The word hung in the air, small but immovable. Thomas' hand dropped an inch. Excuse me, he said, his voice darkening. I said, no. I stepped around him. Harrison Cole read the will. Grandma left these to me. They belong to me. Cassandra let out a sound of pure disgust. You are going to regret this, Minerva. I am calling my own lawyer. I will have that will thrown out before Friday. You do whatever you need to do, Cassandra, I said. But you are not taking this from me. I walked to my beat-up hatchback parked 2 spaces away. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors immediately. I did not look back as I pulled out of the lot, leaving them standing over the ruined remains of Beatrice Orla recipes. I drew my first hard boundary, and the sky finally opened up, dumping sheets of cold rain onto the city. My apartment was a tiny 4th-floor walk-up near the Brown University campus. It was cramped, filled with leaning towers of historical texts, archival storage boxes, and the faint smell of old paper and dust. To my family, it was an embarrassment. To me, it was a sanctuary. I locked the deadbolt and set the heavy brass box on my small kitchen table. The metal gleamed softly under the overhead light. It had an intricate keyhole shaped like a ship anchor, but no key. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the thick parchment map. I unrolled it flat on the table, weighting the corners with heavy textbooks. The paper was stiff, authentic vellum, not cheap replica stock. It was a map of Rhode Island, but not a modern one. Grandma Beatrice had drawn it herself using an archaic cartography style. The coastline was jagged and precise. The islands of Narragansett Bay were meticulously labeled. But the details were what caught my archivist eye. The map was covered in intersecting lines, compass roses, and cryptic notations. Where Providence should be, there was a sketch of a colonial anchor. Down near Newport, a tiny lighthouse was drawn next to a string of numbers that looked like coordinates. Scattered across the parchment were faint pencil markings connecting historical landmarks: the Gaspee Affair burning site, the old Slater Mill, the Toro Synagogue. I dragged my finger across the parchment. This was not a random treasure hunt. Beatrice Orla knew me better than I knew myself. She knew I spent my days deciphering the handwriting of dead sea captains and piecing together forgotten colonial histories. She had designed this specifically for my mind. I stared at a small riddle written in precise cursive near the compass rose. Where the raven seeks knowledge among the silent stacks, look beneath the captain final log to find the key that unlocks the past. The raven seeks knowledge among the silent stacks. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The Athenaeum. The Providence Athenaeum. Grandma and I used to go there when I was 12. There was a marble bust of a raven perched above the main reading room, a nod to Edgar Allan Poe, who used to haunt the aisles. She had hidden the key there. I realized then what this was. It was not just an inheritance. It was a test, a brilliant, orchestrated gauntlet designed to prove something to me and to them. I traced the line from the raven sketch down toward the southern coast. But the thrill of the puzzle was abruptly cut short by a sound. My cell phone buzzed against the table, vibrating violently. The screen lit up with Thomas caller ID. I ignored it. 2 seconds later, Evelyn called. Then Cassandra. They were relentless. The family had tried intimidation, and I walked away. They were not going to stop. I knew my father. He could not stand being denied. He would not just sit back and let me decipher this map in peace. I looked from the buzzing phone to the ancient parchment. The stakes had just been raised. They were not just angry anymore. They were coming for me. I had to get to the Athenaeum before they figured out a way to force my hand. I grabbed my coat, folded the map, and headed for the door. The hunt was on. The drive down Benefit Street took 12 minutes. I parked 3 blocks away from the Providence Athenaeum. The rain had slowed to a persistent drizzle, leaving the cobblestones slick and dangerous. The library stood like a fortress. It featured tall granite pillars and arched windows resembling a sanctuary built in the 1800s. For me, it was the only place in the city that felt like home. Growing up, while Cassandra was taken to beauty pageants and theater auditions, Grandma Beatrice would take my hand and lead me up these stone steps. She told me once that beauty fades and applause stops, but a sharp mind is a weapon you get to carry forever. I walked through the heavy wooden doors and the smell hit me immediately. A blend of beeswax floor polish, old binding glue, and decaying paper. As an archivist, that scent is my oxygen. Today, it was my adrenaline. I moved past the front circulation desk, keeping my head down. My pulse throbbed in my temples. The map had given me a clear directive. Where the raven seeks knowledge among the silent stacks, look beneath the captain final log to find the key that unlocks the past. Anyone who knows the history of this building knows about the raven. Sarah Helen Whitman used to wander these very aisles with Edgar Allan Poe. A marble bust of a raven sits perched high on a shelf in the main reading room, acting as a silent guardian over the literature section. But the riddle did not just point to the bird. It pointed beneath the captain final log. I bypassed the main reading area and headed straight for the narrow wrought iron staircase leading to the mezzanine. The floorboards creaked under my boots. I walked down the dim aisle dedicated to regional maritime history. The air was cooler up here. Dust danced in the faint light filtering through the tall windows. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books. Ship registries from the 18th century. Naval court-martials, whaling logs. My eyes scanned the titles. Captain logs were categorized by year and port of origin. I reached the end of the section detailing voyages out of Newport. There, tucked between a thick volume on celestial navigation and a crumbling ledger, was a book with a faded blue cloth spine. The gold lettering had worn away, but I could barely make out the word Providence. I pulled it from the shelf. The moment the book cleared the row, I knew. The weight was wrong. A volume that size should have been dense, heavy with pressed cotton paper. This book felt light, almost hollow. I set it on a nearby reading table and opened the cover. The pages had been meticulously glued together. A square had been cut out of the center, creating a hidden compartment. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, lay a brass key. I reached down and picked it up. The metal was cold and tarnished. The head of the key was shaped like an intricate compass rose. It was heavy in my palm, real and undeniable. This was the key to the brass box sitting on my kitchen table. Grandma Beatrice had actually done it. She had turned my inheritance into a ghost ship, and I was the only one holding the compass. Tucked underneath the key was a small, folded slip of parchment. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, elegant and precise. A false flag draws the pirate eye, Minerva. Keep your true course hidden. The ocean only reveals her secrets to those who stand where the light sweeps the dark. I read the words twice, committing them to memory. Where the light sweeps the dark. A lighthouse. The map had a faint marking near the southern coast, but I needed to cross-reference the exact coordinates before I drove down there. I slipped the key and the parchment into my coat pocket, placed the hollowed-out book back on the shelf, and made my way downstairs. My heart was soaring. For the first time since the funeral, I felt a surge of genuine triumph. I had beaten my sister to the first prize. I had outsmarted them. I pushed through the heavy front doors and stepped out onto the granite landing. The cold air bit at my cheeks. I pulled my collar up and started walking toward my parked car. That was when the illusion of safety shattered. I stopped at the corner of College Street, waiting for the crosswalk signal. I glanced across the intersection. Parked illegally beside a fire hydrant was a silver sedan. My stomach plummeted. It was a late-model vehicle, spotless and sleek. The driver's seat window was rolled down a fraction of an inch to let the cigarette smoke escape. I recognized the slope of the driver's shoulders. I recognized the watch gleaming on his wrist as he held a cell phone to his ear. It was Thomas, my father. I stepped back into the shadow of a large oak tree, pulling myself out of his direct line of sight. My mind raced. What was he doing here? The law office was miles away in the opposite direction. He had no reason to be parked near the Athenaeum. He hated libraries. He considered reading a waste of time, unless it involved a stock portfolio. He was watching the entrance. He was tailing me. I watched him take a drag from his cigarette. He was speaking animatedly into the phone, tapping his steering wheel with his free hand. He was not looking for me. He was reporting my location. A cold, paralyzing realization washed over me. If Thomas was sitting in a parked car 3 blocks from my apartment tracking my movements, where were Evelyn and Cassandra? My parents had a spare key to my apartment. They demanded one 2 years ago, claiming it was for emergencies in case there was a fire or a leak. I had given it to them to avoid a fight, to keep the peace. They did not care about the map coordinates. They did not want to solve a riddle. They just wanted the brass box, and they knew I had left it on my kitchen table. Thomas was not here to confront me. He was acting as a lookout. He was making sure I stayed inside the library long enough for his wife and his golden child to breach my home. The family dynamic had shifted in the span of an hour. This was no longer a petty dispute over an estate. This was not a disagreement in a lawyer office. My father, my mother, and my sister were operating as a coordinated unit. They were a cartel, moving to strip me of the one thing I had ever truly owned. The betrayal tasted like copper in my mouth. They were invading my sanctuary. They were touching my things, pulling apart my safe space, all to hand my inheritance over to a woman who had just smashed our grandmother recipes in a wet parking lot. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to scream. But I stopped myself. Calling the cops would mean filing a report, waiting for officers, alerting Thomas that I knew he was there. It would drag the situation into a public arena where Cassandra thrived and where my parents could easily twist the narrative. "Oh, officer, we were just checking on our grieving daughter." I could not play their game. I had to play mine. I kept to the shadows, walking briskly away from the intersection. I took the back alleys, navigating the steep hills of the east side, using the narrow brick paths only locals knew. I bypassed the main streets entirely, keeping my head down and my pace relentless. I needed to get back to my apartment. I needed to see exactly how far they were willing to go. The rain started falling harder, soaking my hair and slipping down my collar. I did not care. The cold clarity of the situation settled into my bones. Grandma Beatrice had warned me in the second clue. A false flag draws the pirate eye. She knew they would try to steal it. She knew they would not play fair. She had prepared me for a war they thought they were going to win through brute force. I reached the back entrance of my apartment building. My hands were shaking not from the cold, but from a deep, focused anger. I unlocked the service door and slipped into the stairwell. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs in total silence, gripping the iron railing. I reached my floor. The hallway was empty. I walked softly toward my unit at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar. The wood around the deadbolt was splintered. They had not even used the spare key. They had forced their way inside. I stood outside my own home, listening to the sound of drawers being pulled open and items being thrown to the floor. The hunt was no longer a game. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Now it was my turn to lay a trap. I stepped through the splintered door frame of my fourth-floor apartment. The air inside tasted like drywall dust and disrupted fabric fibers. My living room was unrecognizable. My personal sanctuary had been torn apart. Sofa cushions were sliced open with the stuffing spilling onto the hardwood floor like dirty snow. My bookshelves, the ones I had painstakingly organized by historical era, were cleared. Hundreds of textbooks, biographies, and archival records lay in heaps. The spines were bent and the pages were torn. I walked down the short hallway toward my bedroom. My mattress was flipped off the box spring. My dresser drawers were pulled out and dumped. Sweaters and jeans tangled with old photographs. Evelyn and Cassandra had been thorough. They had searched every corner looking for the map and the brass box. I went back to the kitchen. The heavy brass box sat exactly where I had left it on the small dining table. It was not untouched. Deep gouges scarred the metal near the keyhole. They had taken a flathead screwdriver, or perhaps a claw hammer, trying to force the lock open. Grandma Beatrice had bought that box from a maritime antique dealer. It was forged to survive shipwrecks and storms. A tantrum with household tools was never going to break it open. They could not crack the lock, and they could not carry a 30-pound metal box down 4 flights of stairs without attracting the attention of my neighbors. So they left it behind, hoping to find the map instead. I stood in the middle of my ruined home. A normal person might have cried. A typical daughter might have called the police or confronted her mother demanding an explanation. I did not shed a single tear. The sadness was gone. It burned off in an instant, leaving behind a cold, hardened focus. My family had invaded my personal space. They viewed my home as collateral damage in their pursuit of unearned wealth. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just the quiet archivist who would eventually fold under their pressure. They thought they could break my spirit by breaking my things. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers brushed the thick, folded parchment. They had torn apart my entire life, looking for a piece of paper I had been carrying the whole time. I pulled the map out and unrolled it on the kitchen counter, clearing away the debris of broken coffee mugs. I am an archivist. My daily routine involves preserving documents that are hundreds of years old. I know how people hid things before digital encryption existed. I opened my work bag, which I had carried with me to the library. Inside was a small black carrying case. It contained my restoration kit. I pulled out a specialized ultraviolet light pen and a small glass vial of chemical solvent used to stabilize decaying ink. Grandma Beatrice knew my profession intimately. She knew the exact tools I used to uncover hidden histories. I uncapped the vial and dabbed a tiny amount of the solvent onto a cotton swab. The smell of the chemical was sharp and clinical. I gently brushed the liquid over the bottom right corner of the parchment, where a cluster of meaningless, decorative swirls had been drawn. The thick paper absorbed the solvent. I clicked the ultraviolet pen on. A soft purple glow washed over the parchment. The decorative swirls vanished immediately. In their place, sharp, precise, colonial, encrypted ink flared to life. It was a secondary layer of information invisible to the naked eye, the true map. The coordinates shifted across the page. The path was not what it had initially seemed. The original visible ink was nothing but a clever distraction. Beatrice had created a puzzle that required professional historical knowledge and specific tools to decipher. If Cassandra had managed to steal the map earlier, she would have been staring at a useless drawing. She would have spent years chasing ghosts across Rhode Island. I stared at the glowing coordinates. A plan began to form in my mind, a trap tailored perfectly for my sister and her monumental ego. Cassandra and Evelyn had ruined my home, but they had walked away empty-handed. I knew my father was sitting in his car near the library, believing he had successfully distracted me. Soon he would call them and realize I had slipped past him. They would know I was back at the apartment. They would wait for me to leave again to finish what they started. I turned off the ultraviolet pen. I needed to give them exactly what they wanted. I went to my ruined desk and salvaged a fresh sheet of heavy stock drawing paper. I brewed a pot of dark black tea. I poured the hot tea into a baking pan and submerged the paper, letting the tannins stain the crisp white surface until it looked yellowed and weathered. I dried it with a hairdryer until the edges curled to mimic old vellum. I sat down and began to draw. I recreated Grandma Beatrice's handwriting perfectly. I had spent years studying her letters and cards. I mimicked the slant of her cursive and the sharp angles of her cartography. I drew the outline of the Rhode Island coast, but I changed the destination. I did not point the map toward the southern lighthouses. I pointed it toward the Great Swamp Management Area. The Great Swamp is a sprawling, dense marshland in the southern part of the state. It is famous among historians as the site of a brutal colonial battle during King Philip War. Today, it is over 3,000 acres of thick mud, stagnant water, biting insects, and unpaved trails. It is a miserable, unforgiving place for anyone not wearing chest waders and carrying survival gear. For a woman wearing designer clothes and expecting to dig up a pristine treasure chest, it would be a waking nightmare. I added fake coordinates leading deep into the center of the marsh. I drew a small, intricate chest icon marking the supposed location of the estate deed. I made the map look authentic, promising a vast fortune to whoever followed its path. I rolled the fake parchment up and tied it with a piece of twine. I walked into my bedroom. I picked up a few overturned books and set them on my nightstand. I placed the fake map under the top book, leaving just enough of the curled paper exposed. It looked like I had tried to hide it in a hurry. It looked like a desperate attempt to conceal a precious secret before fleeing. It was the perfect bait. I packed a small overnight bag. I took my archivist tools, the real map, the brass key, and the heavy brass box. I packed them carefully, wrapping the box in a thick sweater. I zipped the bag shut. I stood at the door and looked back at my wrecked apartment. The stage was set. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to my mother. I typed that I was staying at a friend's house tonight because I could not deal with the family drama. I asked her to tell Thomas to stop following me. I hit send. I knew exactly what would happen next. Evelyn would show the text to Cassandra. They would realize the apartment was empty again. They would assume I had fled in a panic and left the map behind. They would return to finish their search. They would find the fake map on the nightstand. They would take the bait without a second thought because they believed they were smarter than me. They wanted the prize without doing the work. I was going to let them have it. I walked out the door, locking the splintered wood behind me. I had a lighthouse to find. I drove to a budget motel on the outskirts of Warwick, paying cash for a room at the end of the corridor. The space smelled of industrial floor cleaner and stale air conditioning, but the deadbolt worked and the curtains pulled tight. I set my overnight bag on the faded floral bedspread. I unzipped the main compartment, pulling out the heavy brass box and the tarnished key. I placed them on the cheap laminate desk. Then I sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled out my phone. I opened Instagram. My sister lived her entire life for an audience. If she thought she was winning, she would broadcast it to the world. I navigated to her profile. The picture was a professional headshot from her brief stint as a real estate agent. I tapped her glowing story ring. The first video was posted 3 hours ago. Cassandra was sitting in the passenger seat of our father's silver sedan. She was wearing a pristine beige trench coat and a pair of expensive leather riding boots. She held a rolled-up piece of paper to the camera, giving a smug, practiced smile. The text overlay read, "Securing the bag, #old money, #estate." She looked triumphant. She thought she had outsmarted me. I tapped to the next story. It was posted an hour later. The scenery had changed. The paved roads were gone, replaced by dense, overgrown tree lines and gray skies. Cassandra was standing near a wooden trailhead sign marking the entrance to the Great Swamp Management Area. Beside her stood a local hiking guide, looking distinctly uncomfortable in a bright orange vest. Cassandra was pointing the camera at the deep, muddy trail ahead. The caption read, Time to dig up the family gold. I tapped again. The timeline skipped forward 45 minutes. The arrogant smile was gone. Cassandra was holding the camera at an awkward angle. Her pristine beige coat was splattered with dark brown sludge. Her expensive leather boots were sinking ankle-deep into thick, stagnant marsh water. The guide was visible in the background, hacking at a wall of thorny brush with a machete. Mosquitoes swarmed the lens. Cassandra's voice was shrill and strained as she complained about the humidity and the smell. I watched the final story uploaded just 10 minutes ago. It was a chaotic, blurry video. Cassandra was knee-deep in muck. Her hair was plastered to her face. She was screaming at the guide, demanding he find the coordinates marked on the parchment. The text overlay was gone. There was no hashtag old money. There was only the harsh reality of a woman who chased unearned wealth straight into a literal swamp. I locked my phone and tossed it onto the bed. The trap had worked flawlessly. My family was miles away, fighting their way through Rhode Island's worst terrain, chasing a drawing I stained with black tea just hours earlier. I had bought myself the time I needed. I walked over to the laminate desk and pulled the chair out. I sat down, facing the brass box. The metal surface was cold under my fingertips. The gouges from their flathead screwdriver served as a stark reminder of their desperation. I took the brass key I found hidden inside the Providence Athenaeum. The head of the key, shaped like a compass rose, felt heavy and purposeful. I slid the key into the intricate lock. It fit perfectly into place. I turned it clockwise. A deep, satisfying metallic click echoed in the quiet motel room. The internal mechanism disengaged. I took a slow breath and lifted the heavy lid. The hinges groaned slightly. I looked inside, expecting to see a deed, a map to a bank vault, or a stack of financial bonds. Instead, I saw a single crisp white document folded neatly in thirds. I reached in and pulled it out. The paper felt thick, official. The header was printed in bold black ink stating, "Last Will and Testament of Beatrice Margaret Orla." My chest tightened. Harrison Cole had already read the will. Why was there another copy hidden inside a locked vault? I unfolded the document and began to read the legal phrasing. The text detailed the entirety of the estate, the financial accounts, the vintage jewelry, the property holdings. I scanned the paragraphs, searching for my name. My eyes hit the third section, detailing the distribution of the primary assets. I leave the entirety of my financial holdings and real estate properties to my eldest granddaughter, Cassandra Orla. The words blurred. A cold, hollow sensation formed in my stomach. I read the sentence again, and then a third time. The legal language was unambiguous. Beatrice had left everything to the sister who despised her, to the golden child who viewed her as a bank account. My hands started to shake. Had this whole thing been a cruel joke? Had my grandmother sent me on a wild goose chase just to deliver a final, devastating insult? I had fought my parents. I had abandoned my apartment. I had drawn a line in the sand, all to uncover a document that proved my family was right all along. I was the invisible daughter. I was the archivist, destined to end up with nothing while Cassandra inherited the earth. The betrayal felt physical. It felt like walking down a flight of stairs in the dark and missing the last step. I dropped the document onto the desk. The crisp paper landed next to the heavy brass box. I rested my elbows on the desk and pressed my palms against my eyes. I needed to think. I needed to channel the woman who deciphered colonial ship logs. I opened my eyes and stared at the brass box. It was empty now, save for the dark velvet lining the bottom. Wait. I leaned closer. I looked at the external dimensions of the box. It was almost 6 inches tall, but the internal velvet floor rested only 3 inches below the rim. The depth did not match. My archivist instincts kicked in. During the colonial era, smugglers and privateers frequently used false bottoms in their sea chests to hide contraband or secret manifests. Grandma Beatrice had purchased this piece from a maritime dealer. I reached into the box and pressed my fingers against the corners of the dark velvet. The bottom felt rigid, but there was a minuscule gap along the right edge. I grabbed my pocket knife from my restoration kit. I slid the thin blade into the gap and applied gentle upward pressure. The velvet panel popped loose. I lifted the false bottom out of the box and set it aside. Underneath, resting on the true brass floor, lay a small sealed envelope and a second piece of rolled parchment. My heart surged. I reached for the envelope first. I broke the wax seal and pulled out a handwritten note. The ink was precise, familiar. This is what they expected, Minerva. This document is the draft I let your parents see to keep them complacent. I knew they would try to steal whatever I left you. I knew they would look for the easy answer. Now use your brain and find what you truly deserve. A wave of profound relief washed over me. The pain of the last 10 minutes evaporated. Beatrice had not betrayed me. She had anticipated their greed. She had built a psychological trap within a physical one. She gave the pirates a fake treasure to make them stop digging. I set the note down and unrolled the small parchment. It contained the final coordinates, confirming what I had decoded from the encrypted map earlier. It pointed directly to the southern coast where the light sweeps the dark. The Narragansett Lighthouse. I had the location. I had the truth. But my time was running out. Cassandra would not stay in that swamp forever. Eventually, the guide would inform her that the coordinates led nowhere. She would realize the map was a forgery. The anger they felt in the parking lot would be nothing compared to the fury of being publicly humiliated in the mud. I packed the real documents back into my bag. I grabbed my car keys. I had to reach the coast before they realized they were chasing a ghost. The drive from the Warwick Motel down Route 1 South felt like moving through a different world. The dense suburban sprawl slowly fell away, replaced by the rugged, unforgiving coastline of southern Rhode Island. I kept the windows rolled down. The sharp bite of the Atlantic Ocean's salt air filled the cabin, clearing my head of the industrial motel smell. By the time I reached Narragansett, the late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long, jagged shadows across the water. Point Judith Lighthouse stood at the edge of the peninsula. It is an imposing octagonal tower built of brown and white stone, acting as a sentinel against the crashing waves. I parked my car in the near-empty gravel lot. The wind whipped my coat around my legs as I walked toward the historic seawall. Looking at the dark, churning water, my mind slipped back 16 years. I was 12 years old, standing on this exact stretch of wet granite. It was my birthday. Cassandra had a regional theater competition in Hartford that weekend. Our parents, Thomas and Evelyn, had packed the family vehicle and driven out of state before dawn. They did not leave a card. They did not leave a gift. They had simply forgotten the date. Grandma Beatrice drove down from Providence to find me sitting on the front porch steps, crying into my knees. She did not offer me hollow apologies. She did not try to make excuses for their neglect. Instead, she drove me straight to Point Judith. We stood by the seawall watching the gulls fight over discarded French fries near the pier. Their shrieks were piercing and relentless. Beatrice reached into her large canvas tote and pulled out a heavy brass spyglass. She extended the barrel and handed it to me, pointing toward the deep water far beyond the noise. "The loudest seagulls just get the scraps on the pier, Minerva," she said, her voice steady against the wind. "Let your sister squawk. You have to learn to dive for the pearls." That sentence became the foundation of my entire life. It was the reason I chose the quiet, meticulous work of an archivist over the loud, performative existence my family valued. I pulled my coat tighter and focused on the present. The riddle hidden beneath the false bottom of the brass box had given me a clear directive. The ocean only reveals her secrets to those who stand where the light sweeps the dark. The sun finally set, leaving the coastline swallowed in shadow. High above me, the towering lantern of the lighthouse flared to life. The beam began its slow, methodical rotation, sweeping across the black water and tracking over the stone perimeter. I watched the path of the light. It was not a random search. Grandma Beatrice was a woman of precise habits. I positioned myself directly beneath the tower and followed the trajectory of the beam as it crossed the seawall. There was a specific section of the granite barrier where the light hit dead center before panning back out to the ocean. I walked over to that exact spot. The stones here were ancient, weathered by centuries of salt and storms. I knelt on the wet ground, ignoring the cold seeping through my jeans. I ran my bare hands over the rough mortar joints. I pressed against the first brick. Solid. The second brick. Unyielding. I moved to the third brick, located just above the tide line. I pushed hard with the heel of my palm. The granite shifted inward by 1/2 inch. My pulse quickened. I dug my fingers into the narrow crevices surrounding the loose stone and pulled. The heavy brick slid out of its slot with a grinding scrape. Behind it, the seawall housed a narrow, dark cavity. I reached inside, and my hand brushed against something smooth and metallic. I pulled it out. It was a watertight, cylindrical maritime cache forged from heavy steel, the kind sailors use to protect ship manifests during storms. I unscrewed the threaded cap. The rubber seal popped softly. Inside the cylinder, wrapped in a layer of protective oilcloth, lay 2 items. I unrolled the cloth. The first object was a heavy metal token bearing the engraved logo of a historic private bank located in the financial district of downtown Providence. Stamped beneath the logo was a specific sequence of numbers. It was a safety deposit box key code. The second item was a small square of cardstock. I held it up to catch the sweeping light of the lighthouse beam. The handwritten note contained just 4 words. Wisdom outlasts greed, Minerva. A profound sense of peace washed over me. I had done it. I had navigated the library. I had deciphered the invisible ink. I had seen through the false will, and I had traced her steps to this forgotten seawall. I knew exactly where the final prize waited. A secure vault inside a bank that required both the physical token in my hand and my matching identification to access. No one else could claim it. My grandmother had secured my future in a fortress of legal and physical protection. I placed the token and the note safely into my inner coat pocket. I pushed the heavy granite brick back into the seawall, concealing the empty cavity. I stood up, brushing the wet sand from my knees. The ocean breeze felt victorious. Then the silence of the coast shattered. My cell phone began to vibrate in my pocket, buzzing with an erratic, urgent rhythm. I pulled it out. The caller identification displayed my father name, Thomas. I hesitated for a fraction of a second. I pressed the green button and held the speaker to my ear. I did not say hello. The background noise on the other end of the line was chaotic. I heard the unmistakable squelch of thick mud and the sound of heavy breathing. Then I heard Cassandra. She was not using her rehearsed corporate voice. She was screaming in a pitch that bordered on hysterical. "Get it off me!" she shrieked, her words punctuated by breathless sobs. "I lost my shoe in the water. This is a nightmare. Make it stop." Thomas spoke into the receiver. His voice was shaking. It was a dark, volatile sound, stripped of his usual composed arrogance. "Minerva," he growled. The word was a threat. His breathing was ragged. "Your sister is covered in swamp sludge. She has leech bites on her legs. We paid a guide $400 to drag us through a toxic marsh, looking for a treasure chest that does not exist." I stood frozen on the dark beach, listening to the sound of their misery. They had found the fake map. They had fallen for the decoy hook, line, and sinker. "Where are you?" Thomas demanded. His tone escalated from anger to a chilling, calculated hostility. "You forged that document. You set us up. We know you have the real coordinates. The game is over, Minerva. We are heading back to Providence right now. We hired a lawyer this afternoon. We are filing an emergency injunction to freeze every asset attached to your name. You are going to be arrested for defrauding this estate." The trap had worked, but the fallout was going to be brutal. They were no longer just a toxic family. They were cornered, desperate enemies armed with legal threats. The real war was moving to the courtroom. I hung up the phone without saying a single word. I turned my back to the ocean and walked toward my car. Tomorrow morning, the bank doors would open. I had to get inside that vault before my father convinced a judge to lock me out of my own life. I slept in the Warwick motel room with a chair jammed under the door handle. I woke up before dawn. My phone displayed 14 missed calls and 6 voicemails, all from Thomas. The messages escalated from angry demands to cold legal threats. I listened to the last one while packing my bag. My father's voice was sharp, clipped, and totally devoid of paternal warmth. "Minerva," he said, "we have retained counsel. We are filing an emergency petition this morning in Providence County Superior Court. We are declaring your grandmother mentally incompetent at the time she drafted those absurd puzzle documents. If you try to access any accounts, the funds will be frozen. Call me. We can settle this without destroying your life." The threat hit me like a physical blow. A sudden chill radiated from my chest. They were moving faster than I anticipated. The legal system was an arena my father understood perfectly. He had spent his entire career in corporate management, leveraging contracts and lawyers to intimidate people into submission. He assumed he could use the same tactics to crush his youngest daughter. I sat on the edge of the cheap motel bed and dialed Harrison Cole. The estate attorney answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, a stark contrast to my racing pulse. "Mr. Cole," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my tone, "my father left a voicemail. He said they hired a lawyer and they are filing to declare Grandma incompetent. He said he is going to freeze the assets." Harrison sighed a soft sound of professional exasperation. "Yes, Minerva. I received a courtesy call from a man named Richard Vance 15 minutes ago. He is a local attorney known for taking desperate cases on contingency. He thrives on loud threats and messy settlements." "Can they do it?" I asked, gripping the phone. "Can they stop me from getting into the vault today?" "Listen to me carefully," Minerva Harrison replied, his tone shifting into absolute authority. "Filing a petition is not the same as winning an injunction. To freeze an estate, they need a judge to review the filing and issue a temporary order. That takes hours, even in an emergency. Your grandmother anticipated this exact maneuver. Do not let them panic you. Stay the course. Do you have the necessary items?" I placed my hand over my coat pocket, feeling the outline of the heavy maritime token. "I have everything I need," Good Harrison said. "Get to the bank." Before I could hang up, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message. It was from Thomas. "We are meeting at the Wayland Square coffee shop at 8:30. Just you and me, no lawyers. Let us handle this like family before the paperwork gets filed. Be there." I stared at the screen. The timing was entirely intentional. He wanted to trap me in a conversation stalling my progress while his lawyer pushed the paperwork through the court. I knew I should ignore him and drive straight to downtown Providence. But a small part of me, the archivist part, that needed to understand the complete picture, realized this was an opportunity. I needed to see exactly how confident he was. I needed to look him in the eye and gauge his next move. I replied with a single word: "Fine." Wayland Square was quiet at 8:30 in the morning. The coffee shop smelled of roasted beans and damp raincoats. Thomas was already sitting at a corner table. He wore a crisp navy suit projecting an aura of complete control. There was no visible trace of the mud or the hysteria from the great swamp the previous night. He had rebuilt his armor. I sat down across from him. I did not take off my coat. The heavy fabric provided a psychological barrier. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Minerva," he said, folding his hands on the table, "you look exhausted. This game you are playing is taking a toll on you." "It is not a game, Thomas," I replied. He smiled a thin, patronizing line. "Let us drop the pretense. We know you forged the map that sent your sister into the marsh. It was a clever trick, I will give you that, but trickery does not hold up in a court of law. We have Mr. Vance filing the incompetence petition as we speak." Beatrice was 82 years old. She was confused. She turned her estate into a pirate treasure hunt. No judge is going to uphold that. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Give me the real coordinates, Minerva. Hand over whatever access code you found. If you do, I will personally guarantee you receive a fair percentage of the liquid assets. If you do not, Mr. Vance will tie this estate up in litigation for the next 10 years. You do not have the money to fight us. You will bankrupt yourself trying. I looked at the man sitting across from me. He was offering me a fraction of my own inheritance, positioned as a generous favor, while holding a legal knife to my throat. This was the peace he had always demanded. Surrender disguised as compromise. My grandmother was sharper than any lawyer you could hire, I said. My voice was calm, betraying none of the fear churning in my stomach. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew you would try to steal it. That is why she built a fortress you cannot break. Tomas' expression hardened. The patronizing smile vanished. You are making a massive mistake. I am done making mistakes, I said, standing up. I am going to the bank. Tell Cassandra she needs to buy better boots. I turned and walked toward the exit. The bell above the door jingled. I stepped out onto the sidewalk feeling a surge of adrenaline. I had faced him down. I had not folded. But I did not hear his footsteps behind me until it was too late. Minerva, he called out, his voice carrying a sudden, forced warmth. I stopped and turned. Thomas closed the distance between us. Before I could step back, he pulled me into a tight, aggressive embrace. It was jarring, unnatural. He had not hugged me since I was a child. He gripped my shoulders, squeezing hard. We are family, he whispered near my ear. Do not force me to destroy you. He released me, gave me a sharp nod, and walked quickly toward his parked sedan. I stood on the sidewalk, bewildered by the sudden physical contact. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled my coat tighter around myself, shuddering at the false affection. I hurried to my car, eager to put distance between us. I got behind the wheel, locked the doors, and merged into the morning traffic, heading straight for the financial district. I drove for 10 minutes, my mind focused entirely on reaching the historic bank building. But something gnawed at the edge of my consciousness, a detail that felt out of place. Thomas never hugged anyone unless it served a specific purpose. He was a man of calculated actions. The embrace outside the coffee shop was too sudden, too aggressive. He had pressed his hands firmly against my sides, right where the deep pockets of my coat rested. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I pulled into a vacant parking lot behind a diner, throwing the car into park. I ripped my coat off and frantically searched the pockets. I checked the inner breast pocket first. The heavy maritime token and the note from Grandma Beatrice were still there. Safe. Then I checked the deep outer pockets. I ran my fingers along the seams, feeling the thick wool lining. My hand brushed against something hard and unyielding, hidden deep in the left corner. I pulled it out. It was a small, black, rectangular device, no larger than a matchbox. A tiny green light blinked steadily on its surface. The back of the device was fitted with a strong magnet. My breath caught in my throat. It was a GPS tracker. The realization hit me with the force of a tidal wave. The coffee shop meeting was a distraction. Thomas never expected me to surrender the coordinates. He knew I would refuse. The entire conversation was staged, simply to get close enough to plant the device on me. The family had changed tactics overnight. They realized they could not solve the puzzle. They realized the fake map was a trap. So they stopped trying to beat me to the finish line. They decided to let me do all the work, decode all the clues, and open all the doors. They were not racing me anymore. They were following me. I stared at the blinking green light. Thomas and Cassandra were watching my every move on a smartphone screen, waiting for me to lead them directly to the fortune. The legal threat the sleazy attorney, the forced meeting, it was all designed to panic me into rushing straight to the final location. I had to get to the bank vault before they mobilized. The rules of engagement had just fundamentally changed. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the target. I sat in the driver's seat of my car, staring at the blinking green light of the small tracking device. I placed the plastic square gently into the cup holder. I could not destroy it. If the signal dropped, Thomas would know I had discovered his deception. He would pivot to a new strategy, a blind, unpredictable attack. I needed him to believe he was still dictating the terms of the engagement. I needed him to follow me. I put the car into gear and merged into the heavy morning traffic, heading straight toward the downtown Providence financial district. The sky was an unbroken sheet of pale gray. The city felt cold and indifferent. I navigated the narrow one-way streets until I found a parking garage 2 blocks from my destination. I left my coat draped over the passenger seat with the tracking device tucked safely underneath it. Let them watch the blinking dot sit idle in a concrete structure. I grabbed the heavy maritime token and my identification, sliding them into my purse. I walked briskly down Westminster Street. The historic bank building stood on the corner, projecting an aura of impenetrable wealth. It featured towering granite columns and heavy bronze doors that looked like they belonged on a fortress. This institution did not cater to standard checking accounts. It managed old Rhode Island money, protecting generational trusts and private estates. Grandma Beatrice had always lived modestly in a small 2-bedroom house on the east side of the city. My parents constantly complained about her refusal to upgrade her lifestyle. They assumed she was hoarding a moderate savings account. They never understood the difference between looking rich and actually possessing wealth. I pushed through the bronze doors. The interior was vast and silent. Polished marble floors echoed beneath my boots. A receptionist directed me toward a private office in the back. A senior vault manager, a man with a tailored gray suit and a practiced neutral expression, greeted me. I did not waste time with small talk. I placed the heavy maritime token onto his polished glass desk and handed him my driver license. He examined the token carefully. He typed a sequence into his computer. A subtle shift occurred in his posture. He stood up and offered a polite nod. "Right this way, Miss Orla," he said. He led me down a carpeted hallway and through a heavy steel gate. The air in the vault room was climate-controlled, cool and dry, preserving the contents of hundreds of polished steel boxes lining the walls. He located the box matching my token, inserted a master key, and stepped back, allowing me to proceed. I turned the lock and pulled the long metal drawer free. I carried the container to a private viewing room enclosed by frosted glass. I sat at a small oak table and took a deep breath. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a single, thick manila folder. I opened it. The first document was a certificate of formation for a limited liability company named Golden Anchor Holdings. I turned the page. The next document was an original, unredacted property deed. The official seals of Newport County were stamped across the bottom. The property address was listed on Ocean Drive, one of the most exclusive historic coastlines in the entire country. Grandma Beatrice owned a pristine coastal colonial estate in Newport. I stared at the paperwork in stunned silence. Thomas and Evelyn had spent their entire marriage trying to impress their country club peers. They had constantly discussed buying a summer home in Newport, stretching their credit to the limit just to maintain the illusion of high society status. They could never afford it. And all the while, the woman they treated like a burden owned a piece of Rhode Island's most coveted real estate outright under a secret corporate entity. She kept it hidden because she knew Thomas would view it as his personal playground. She knew he would leverage the equity to fund his superficial lifestyle. The property appraisal was attached to the deed. The estate was valued well over $1 million. I traced the signature on the bottom line. Beatrice had left the entire holding company to me. I was no longer a struggling archivist living in a tiny fourth-floor walk-up. I was the sole owner of $1 million coastal estate. The brass box, the riddles, the false will, the lighthouse, they were all designed to filter out the greedy and lead me to this very room. I placed the documents back into the folder, holding it tightly against my chest. I left the vault room, thanked the manager, and walked back out into the main lobby. The adrenaline was pulsing through my veins. I had secured the legal proof. I had won. I pushed open the bronze front doors and stepped out onto the damp sidewalk. My path was immediately blocked. Standing directly in front of me was a man I did not recognize, but whose purpose was instantly clear. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that smelled strongly of stale cologne and stale coffee. He had thinning hair and a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. He held a thick stack of legal papers attached to a wooden clipboard. "Miss Orla," he said. His voice was loud, designed to draw attention and intimidate. "I am Richard Vance. I represent your father, Thomas Orla." The sleazy attorney, the man Thomas hired to execute his legal threats. He had not waited for me at the coffee shop. He had monitored the tracking device, just like my father. When my car parked nearby, he walked over to intercept me. "Move out of my way, Mr. Vance," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. I clutched the folder tightly under my arm. He took a step forward, invading my personal space. He raised the clipboard, tapping a pen against the top page. "I have a drafted emergency injunction right here," he sneered. "We are petitioning the court to freeze every single asset tied to Beatrice Orla. You are not permitted to remove any documents from this financial institution. Hand the folder over to me right now." I looked at the paperwork clipped to his board. My archivist eye caught the lack of a judicial signature. The bottom line was empty. There was no official court stamp. "That is a drafted petition," I said. "It is not an order. You do not have a judge's signature. You have a piece of paper. You have no legal authority to stop me." Vance's face flushed a deep, ugly red. He was not used to targets who read the fine print. He reached out, grabbing my shoulder with a heavy, damp hand. "Listen to me, little girl," he spat. "A judge is reviewing this file right now. You are going to hand over those documents, or I will have you charged with theft." He tried to snatch the folder from my grip. I did not retreat. I did not shrink away to keep the peace. I leaned into his grip, planted my boots firmly on the pavement, and drove my free hand hard into his chest. I shoved him with every ounce of strength I had. The sudden physical resistance caught him off guard. Vance stumbled backward, his dress shoes slipping on the wet concrete. He flailed his arms, dropping his clipboard. The unsigned legal papers scattered across the sidewalk. "Do not ever touch me again," I said, my voice cold and hard as the granite columns behind me. I stepped over his fallen paperwork and broke into a sprint. I ran down Westminster Street, dodging pedestrians, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm. I reached the parking garage, flew up the concrete stairs, and unlocked my car. I threw the folder onto the passenger seat next to the blinking tracking device. Vance was right about one thing. A judge was likely reviewing the petition. The injunction could be signed at any moment. Once the freeze order was formalized, accessing the Newport property would become a protracted legal nightmare. The family would tie the estate up in court for years, draining my resources. I needed more than just a piece of paper. Under local property laws establishing immediate physical possession of a vacant home, changing the locks and occupying the structure creates a significant legal hurdle for anyone attempting to seize it through a preliminary injunction. I shoved the key into the ignition. I peeled out of the parking garage, tires squealing against the painted concrete. I had to beat the clock. I had to beat the court order. And most importantly, I had to beat my family to the coast. I merged onto the highway, pressing the accelerator down, driving straight toward Newport. The drive from Providence to Newport took 45 minutes. I pushed my small hatchback faster than it had ever gone. The coastal highway blurred past the windows. The ocean air grew thicker, saltier, carrying the distinct scent of old money and manicured lawns. I crossed the Claiborne Pell Bridge, the massive suspension cables rising into the gray sky like the ribs of a giant steel leviathan. I merged onto Ocean Drive, winding along the rocky coastline, where historic mansions sat perched above the crashing waves, hidden behind wrought iron gates and towering hedges. I navigated the turns, matching the address on the deed to the discreet stone markers lining the road. I found the entrance. 2 stone pillars flanked a long, winding gravel driveway, heavily concealed by ancient oak trees and thick rhododendron bushes. The property was hidden from the main road, designed for absolute privacy. I turned the wheel, and the tires crunched onto the gravel. The driveway curved, revealing the estate. It was breathtaking. A pristine center hall colonial built from weathered gray cedar shingles and white trim. The architecture was flawless, preserving the maritime history of the region while maintaining a quiet, understated elegance. A wide wraparound porch offered an unobstructed view of the Atlantic Ocean. It was not a gaudy, newly constructed mansion. It was a piece of living history. It was everything Thomas had ever wanted to possess to prove his worth to the world. And Grandma Beatrice had secured it for me. I parked my car near the front steps. I grabbed the manila folder containing the deed and the brass key, which, according to the vault manager, also served as the skeleton key for the property's original locks. I left my coat draped over the passenger seat, the tiny green light of the tracking device still blinking beneath the wool. I walked up the wide wooden steps. My boots echoed against the porch floorboards. The wind swept across the peninsula, chilling my arms. I reached the heavy oak front door. I slid the brass key into the antique lock. It turned with a smooth, heavy click. The door opened, swinging inward to reveal a grand foyer with dark hardwood floors and a sweeping staircase. I stepped over the threshold. I had established physical possession. I had crossed the finish line before the judge signed the freeze order. I let out a long, trembling exhale, leaning my forehead against the cool wood of the door frame. Then the sound of tearing gravel shattered the quiet coastal air. I turned around. Speeding up the long driveway, tearing through the manicured entrance, were 3 vehicles. Thomas' leased silver sedan led the pack. It was followed closely by Cassandra luxury sports utility vehicle. Trailing behind them was a dented gray compact car that I recognized instantly. It belonged to Richard Vance, the sleazy attorney from the bank's sidewalk. They had not gone to a courthouse. They had not waited for a judge. They had monitored the tracking device. When they saw the blinking dot leave the financial district and cross the Newport Bridge, they realized I had secured the final prize. They followed my exact route using the GPS signal to bypass the riddles in the maps, arriving directly at the location. The cars slammed into park, throwing gravel across the pristine lawn. Doors swung open simultaneously. Cassandra stepped out first. She had changed out of her swamp-stained clothes. She was wearing a sharp burgundy blazer and dark sunglasses, looking every bit the entitled heiress she believed herself to be. Thomas and Evelyn followed, their faces tight, with a mixture of shock and predatory anticipation as they took in the magnitude of the estate. Richard Vance scrambled out of his compact car, adjusting his cheap suit, holding his clipboard like a shield. My parents stopped at the base of the stairs, staring at the house in open awe. Evelyn brought a hand to her mouth. Thomas' eyes widened, greed momentarily overriding his anger. He looked at the cedar shingles the ocean view, the sheer financial value radiating from the property. He had spent his life chasing this exact image. Cassandra did not hesitate. She marched up the wooden steps, her heels clicking aggressively. She stopped 3 feet away from me, standing on my porch. She removed her sunglasses, crossing her arms. A smug, victorious smile spread across her face. "Well, Minerva," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "I have to admit, you are a decent fetch dog. Thank you for doing the legwork. We will take the keys now." She held out an expectant, manicured hand. I stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. I held the folder tightly against my side. I did not raise my voice. I did not move a single inch. "What are you doing here, Cassandra?" She laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "We are claiming our property." Thomas checked the public tax records on the way over. Golden Anchor Holdings. Very clever. But Beatrice was completely delusional when she set that up. "We have Mr. Vance here to document everything." Vance climbed the steps, standing behind my sister. He looked at me with a vindictive gleam in his eye, recovering his false bravado now that he had reinforcements. "Miss Orla," he sneered, "you are standing on disputed property. The injunction petition is filed. By attempting to occupy this structure, you are formally trespassing. I strongly advise you to vacate the premises immediately. If you refuse, we will call the local authorities and have you removed." Thomas stepped forward, standing next to Cassandra. He tried to project the same false paternal authority he used in the wet parking lot days ago. "Minerva, this is the end of the line. The game is over. Hand over the keys and the folder. Walk away. If you comply, I will make sure Vance drops the theft charges. Do not force me to humiliate you in front of the police." 30 years of family bullying coalesced on this single porch. This was the dynamic that had defined my entire existence. Cassandra demanded. Thomas threatened. Evelyn stood silently by, watching it happen. Vance was just a hired gun validating their toxicity with legal jargon. They expected me to fold. They expected the quiet archivist to crumble under the weight of their combined intimidation. They believed that if they yelled loud enough, if they threatened aggressively enough, the universe would simply hand them what they wanted. I looked at my mother standing near the gravel. "Evelyn, you are allowing this," I asked. My voice was calm, cutting through the coastal wind. "You are watching them try to steal from me." Evelyn looked down, unable to meet my gaze. She wrung her hands. "It is for the best, Minerva. We are keeping the peace. It is the fair thing to do." The fair thing. The phrase tasted like ash. I looked back at Thomas and Cassandra. They were waiting for me to step aside. They were waiting for the familiar surrender. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not argue the semantics of the law with a man holding an unsigned clipboard. I simply adjusted my grip on the manila folder and looked Thomas directly in the eyes. "You are not calling the police, Thomas," I said, "because you do not own this property. You do not have a court order. You have a tracking device you slipped into my coat like a coward, and you have a desperate lawyer who is lying to you to collect a fee." Vance's face turned crimson. "Now listen here, you little—" "No, you listen," I interrupted, my voice echoing off the cedar shingles. "I am the sole managing member of Golden Anchor Holdings. I hold the unredacted deed. I have crossed the threshold and established physical possession. I am the legal owner of this estate, and you are trespassing on my property." Cassandra dropped her hand. The smug smile faltered, replaced by a flash of genuine uncertainty. She looked at Thomas. "Do something," she hissed. "Tell her to leave." Thomas took a step closer, his face darkening into a mask of pure rage. "You ungrateful little—" He raised his hand, pointing a finger directly at my face. He was preparing to cross the final physical boundary, preparing to grab me and drag me off the porch. But before he could close the distance, the crunch of heavy tires rolling over the gravel drive interrupted him. A sleek black sedan pulled smoothly into the estate parking precisely next to Thomas' leased vehicle. The driver's side door opened. A man stepped out, adjusting his tailored jacket. He held a thick leather briefcase. He looked up at the porch, assessing the chaotic scene with cold, analytical precision. It was Harrison Cole. The estate attorney had arrived. The heavy tires of the black sedan crunched over the gravel. The engine idled for a brief second before shutting off. The coastal wind whipped across the lawn, but the silence that followed the engine cutting out felt heavier than the ocean breeze. Harrison Cole stepped out of the vehicle. He adjusted the lapels of his dark charcoal suit. He reached into the passenger seat and retrieved a thick leather briefcase. He did not look rushed. He did not look panicked. He moved with the measured, deliberate pace of a judge walking to the bench to deliver a final verdict. Richard Vance, the hired attorney standing on my porch, shifted his weight. His false bravado faltered. Vance made his living intimidating grieving widows and confused siblings in cheap mediation rooms. He was a bottom feeder. Harrison Cole was the apex predator of the Rhode Island estate law ecosystem. The difference in their status was visible in the way they carried themselves. Vance clutched his plastic clipboard like a shield. Harrison carried his briefcase like a weapon. Thomas tried to intercept the older lawyer before he could reach the wooden stairs. "Harrison, what are you doing here?" Thomas demanded, his voice strained, trying to project authority. "This is a private family matter. We are securing the premises. My attorney is handling the preliminary injunction." "You have no jurisdiction here." Harrison did not slow his pace. He did not even look at my father. He bypassed Thomas entirely, treating him like an obstacle rather than an equal. Harrison placed his polished leather shoes onto the bottom step and ascended the porch. He stopped right beside me. He turned and faced the trio standing on the stairs. He looked at Vance. "State your name and your bar association number," Harrison commanded. His tone was not a request. It was a subpoena. Vance swallowed hard. His Adam apple bobbed against his tight shirt collar. "Richard Vance," he stammered. "Rhode Island Bar, number 4821. I am representing the Orla family in an emergency petition." A petition based on what grounds, Harrison asked. "Mental incompetence." Vance replied, regaining a fraction of his confidence. He held up the unsigned paperwork. Beatrice Orla lacked the cognitive capacity to execute a valid estate transfer. She constructed a bizarre treasure hunt involving secret codes and hidden keys. That behavior demonstrates severe neurological decline. We are freezing the estate until a full medical review can be conducted. Thomas nodded firmly, stepping up to the next stair. Exactly. My mother was delusional. She was not of sound mind. Minerva took advantage of a sick woman to steal this property. Harrison did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply placed his leather briefcase onto the flat surface of the wooden porch railing. He clicked the brass latches open. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the yard. He reached inside and extracted a thick, bound stack of documents. The top page featured a prominent red notary seal and a bold black heading. "This is the Certified Golden Anchor Holdings Irrevocable Trust," Harrison stated. He held the document up. It was executed 6 months ago. "As the sole managing trustee until the conditions of inheritance were met, I possess the legal authority to trespass anyone attempting to unlawfully occupy this property." Vance scoffed. "An irrevocable trust can be pierced if the grantor was incapacitated, Mr. Cole. You know that. We will depose her physician. We will prove she was suffering from dementia." Harrison reached into the briefcase a second time. He pulled out a separate manila folder. He opened it and extracted 3 distinct medical reports printed on pristine white letterhead. "Your grandmother was a woman of extraordinary foresight," Minerva Harrison said, addressing me directly while keeping his eyes locked on Vance. "She anticipated her son would attempt to weaponize her health against her wishes. She knew Thomas would try to paint her as unstable the moment he realized he was not the primary beneficiary." Harrison turned the documents around so Vance could read the headers. "During the exact week Beatrice Orla drafted the map and established the trust, she scheduled appointments with 3 independent, board-certified neurologists," Harrison explained. "Dr. Eris Thorne from Providence, Dr. Elias Vance from Boston, Dr. Sarah Jenkins from Newport. 3 separate, highly respected medical professionals who had no prior affiliation with our firm." Tomas' face went pale. He stared at the medical letterhead. "What are those?" he whispered. "These are comprehensive cognitive evaluations," Harrison replied. "Beatrice subjected herself to rigorous testing. Spatial reasoning, memory retention, executive function, and logical deduction. She scored in the 99th percentile across every single metric. Dr. Thorne specifically noted that her mental acuity was sharper than most patients 30 years her junior." These evaluations are sign-dated and notarized. They were conducted the exact same week the trust was finalized. Harrison took a step closer to the edge of the porch, towering over the sleazy lawyer. "You have 0 legal footing, Mr. Vance," Harrison said, his voice dropping to a freezing whisper. "If you file that petition knowing these evaluations exist, I will personally submit a motion to the Ethics Board for filing a frivolous lawsuit. I will see you sanctioned. I will see you fined. And I will make certain every judge in Providence County knows you attempted to defraud a legally sound, irrevocable trust." The blood drained from Richard Vance's face. His pale skin turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the certified trust. He looked at the 3 medical reports. He was a man who calculated risk for a living, and he instantly realized his risk factor had just skyrocketed to fatal levels. He did not get paid unless he won a settlement. This case was a concrete wall. There was no settlement. There was only professional ruin. Vance lowered his clipboard. He took a slow step backward down the wooden stairs. "Mr. Orla," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "I cannot proceed with the injunction. I am sorry. The medical documentation supersedes our filing. You do not have a case." Thomas spun around, eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" "We have an agreement. You said we could freeze the house. You said we could force her into mediation. Do your job." "I cannot file a fraudulent petition," Vance muttered. He turned his back on my father and scurried down the remaining stairs toward his dented, compact car. He threw his clipboard onto the passenger seat, climbed inside, and started the engine. He did not look back as he reversed down the long gravel driveway, abandoning his clients on my front lawn. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The hired gun had fled. The legal threat was vaporized. The Orla family was left standing on the gravel, armed with nothing but their own hollow entitlement. Thomas' face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He stepped forward, his hands balled into tight fists. He ignored the lawyer retreating vehicle and focused his wrath directly on Harrison Cole. "You planned this," Thomas shouted. His voice echoed off the coastal rocks. "You conspired with my mother to cut me out. I am her son. I endured her stubbornness for decades. I paid for her roof repairs. I sat through her boring historical lectures. I have family rights. This house belongs to the Orla name. It belongs to me. You cannot just lock me out of my own legacy." Harrison closed his briefcase. He looked down at Thomas with a profound sense of pity mixed with disgust. "You have no legacy here," Thomas Harrison said. "The property is held within an irrevocable trust. It bypasses probate entirely. It cannot be altered, amended, or dissolved by a judge. It is bulletproof. Your mother designed it this way because she knew you would try to sell it to the highest bidder the moment she drew her last breath. You do not possess any rights to this estate. Minerva is the sole legal owner." Evelyn let out a soft, muffled sob. She pressed her hand against her mouth, staring at the grand colonial house, realizing she would never host a single dinner party inside its walls. She would never brag to her country club friends about her Newport summer home. The dream was dead. Cassandra stood rigid on the gravel. Her burgundy blazer suddenly looked cheap against the backdrop of true generational wealth. Her sunglasses were clutched so tightly in her hand, the plastic frames groaned. She realized the house was gone. She realized the land was gone. The multi-million-dollar estate belonged exclusively to the sister she had mocked and belittled her entire life. The realization broke something inside her. If she could not have the coastal mansion, she needed something else to validate her existence. She needed her payout. She pivoted her focus from the structure to the liquid assets. Her eyes darted from Harrison back to me, burning with desperate, fierce entitlement. "Fine," Cassandra screamed, her voice cracking under the strain. "Keep the stupid old house, Minerva. I do not care. But the trust dictates the rest of the estate. Where is my money, Harrison? The will said the financial accounts belong to me. Grandma left me her personal holdings. I want my half of the liquid assets right now." She pointed a shaking, manicured finger at the estate attorney, demanding her unearned fortune. She thought she still held a winning ticket. She thought she still had a claim to a massive payout. She had no idea she had already thrown it away. Cassandra pointed her shaking, manicured finger at the estate attorney, demanding her unearned fortune. She thought she still held a winning ticket. She thought she had a valid claim to a payout. She had no idea she had already thrown it away. "I want my money, Harrison," she shrieked. Her voice broke the heavy coastal silence echoing off the weathered cedar shingles of my house. The will stated the financial accounts belonged to me. Grandma left me her personal holdings. I want my half of the liquid assets right now. Harrison just stood there. The ocean breeze ruffled his silver hair. He looked down at the furious woman standing on the gravel. He did not reach for his briefcase immediately. He let her words hang in the damp air, allowing her entitlement to echo back at her. Evelyn chimed in, trying to salvage the situation. "Yes, Harrison," she pleaded. "Beatrice must have left cash. Cassandra deserves her portion. We all know she was intended to receive a substantial sum. This house might belong to Minerva, but the bank accounts are a separate matter entirely." Cassandra crossed her arms, hugging her burgundy blazer tight against the chill. "I am not leaving this driveway until you write me a check," she declared. "She gave me nothing but a wooden container full of garbage recipes. It is an insult. I am entitled to real compensation." Growing up, Cassandra never cooked. She viewed the kitchen as a place for servants or hired caterers. During holidays, she would pose for photographs holding a pie she bought from an expensive bakery, pretending she baked it herself just to garner compliments. Grandma Beatrice knew this intimately. Beatrice spent her winters standing over a hot stove teaching me how to dice potatoes and shuck fresh clams. She poured her love into those meals. Cassandra always turned her nose up at the food, complaining about carbohydrates and butter. She disdained the effort required to create something from scratch. Harrison closed his eyes for a brief moment. He let out a long, slow breath. When he opened his eyes again, the sharp legal edge was gone. It was replaced by a look of profound pity. It was the expression you give someone who just walked off a cliff because they refused to look down. "Cassandra," he said, his tone unnervingly gentle. Estate law is a complex field. It allows a grantor to establish specific prerequisites before transferring wealth. We call these condition precedents. Sometimes they take the form of a morality clause. Cassandra scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I do not care about your legal terminology. Just tell me the account balance." Your grandmother possessed a wicked sense of irony. Harrison continued, ignoring her interruption. "She understood your priorities perfectly. She knew you valued appearance over substance. She suspected you would view her personal history as worthless. So she decided to test that theory." Thomas stepped forward, sensing the trap. "What kind of test, Harrison? What are you talking about?" "Beatrice Orla established a separate high-yield index fund," Harrison explained, holding his briefcase steady. "It accrued interest for over a decade. The current valuation sits right around $200,000. Cassandra's eyes widened. The anger morphed into hungry validation. $200,000, she repeated, her posture straightening. "See, I knew it. I knew she had real money tucked away. Hand it over. Give me the authorization forms." "The funds were placed in a blind trust," Harrison stated. "I am the executor." Beatrice left very explicit instructions regarding the disbursement. The key to unlocking that account was not a brass token or a hidden vault combination. The key was hiding in plain sight. He paused, letting the coastal wind fill the silence. "It was the recipe card for her famous Rhode Island clam chowder," Harrison revealed. I watched Cassandra brow furrow. She shook her head, a mocking grin spreading across her face. "Are you joking? A recipe card unlocks a bank account. That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard." "That specific index card was printed on custom archival stock," Harrison explained, unbothered by her mockery. It contained a distinct watermark visible only when held up to the light. Woven into the fibers of the paper was a micro-printed routing number. Beatrice stipulated a strict 30-day morality clause. Evelyn gasped, clutching her pearl necklace. Her eyes darted between the lawyer and her eldest daughter. "If you had taken the time to actually read the gift she gave you," Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a somber pitch, "you would have noticed the watermark. The instructions were printed on the back. You had 1 month to bring that original intact recipe card back to my office. You were required to use it to cook your grandmother chowder for a family dinner. If you completed that simple act of honoring her memory, it would trigger the immediate release of the $200,000 into your personal checking account." The color began to drain from Cassandra's face. The smug entitlement evaporated, replaced by a creeping dread. "She wanted you to value the tradition," Harrison said. "She wanted you to prove that you cared about her legacy more than her wallet. If you showed even a fraction of sentimental respect, the fortune was yours. Harrison adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked directly into Cassandra's terrified eyes. "Did you keep the wooden box, Cassandra?" he asked softly. "Do you have the recipe cards?" Cassandra's lips parted, but no sound emerged. She looked like all the air had been sucked out of her lungs. Her knees buckled slightly. She swayed on her expensive heels. I stood on the porch watching the horror wash over her. I remembered the rainy pavement outside the law firm. I remembered the sound of the dark cherry wood shattering against the wet asphalt. I remembered watching decades of handwritten index cards scattering into muddy puddles, soaking up dirty water. Thomas turned to his eldest daughter. His face was a portrait of dawning panic. "Cassandra," he urged, grabbing her shoulder, "tell me you kept it. Tell me you picked those papers up." Cassandra shook her head slowly. Her gaze was fixed on the gravel beneath her feet. "I threw it away," she whispered. Her voice was hollow, a ghostly echo of her usual arrogant volume. "What do you mean you threw it away?" Thomas yelled, his composure breaking. He shook her arm. "It was $250,000. Where is the box?" "I left it in the parking lot," she choked out, tears welling in her eyes. "I left it in the mud. I thought it was garbage." "You threw away your inheritance because of your own vanity," I said, speaking for the first time since Harrison arrived. My voice carried across the lawn, cool and unbothered. "You smashed it into pieces because you thought you deserved a payout without doing the work." Evelyn began to weep openly, hiding her face in her hands. Thomas let go of Cassandra's shoulder, taking a stunned step backward. He stared at his golden child, realizing her temper tantrum had cost them their final chance at wealth. Harrison Cole offered no sympathy. "The law does not reward discarded conditions," he stated, formally. "Since the asset was destroyed, the trust dictates that the $200,000 fund will automatically roll over into various historical preservation charities chosen by Minerva. The transaction is final." Cassandra fell to her knees. The sharp stones dug into her bare skin, but she did not seem to notice. The reality of the situation crushed her. She had mocked me for reading dusty books. She had mocked our grandmother for holding on to old traditions. Her superficial greed had blinded her to the very treasure she demanded. She was left kneeling in the driveway of my estate, holding nothing but the bitter knowledge of her colossal failure. Cassandra remained on the gravel, the sharp stones dug into her bare knees, tearing the fabric of her expensive stockings. She did not attempt to stand. The magnitude of her failure anchored her to the ground. She had spent her entire existence believing the universe owed her a pristine path paved with wealth and adoration. Now that path was gone. She was kneeling outside a multi-million-dollar estate she would never own, mourning a separate $250,000 fund she had personally tossed into the garbage. Thomas stared at his eldest daughter. The look in his eyes transitioned from shock to a deep, calculating resentment. He had poured decades of resources into cultivating Cassandra. He funded her lavish lifestyle. He paid for her designer wardrobe and her failed business ventures. He did this because he viewed her as an investment. He expected her to secure a wealthy marriage or land a lucrative career that would elevate his own social standing. She had just incinerated his final opportunity for a major financial windfall. Evelyn wept quietly into her hands. She possessed no capacity to mediate a conflict of this scale. Her entire maternal strategy consisted of avoiding difficult conversations and hoping problems resolved themselves. Confronted with the undeniable ruin of her favorite child, she simply shut down. Then the sound of screeching brakes interrupted the family meltdown. Richard Vance had not driven far. His dented, compact car stopped abruptly near the edge of the estate entrance. The reverse lights flared bright red. The vehicle backed up the gravel path, stopping a few yards away from Thomas. Vance shifted the car into park and stepped out. He did not carry his plastic clipboard this time. He held a single sheet of yellow carbon copy paper. The sleazy attorney recognized that his contingency fee was dead. He was not going to earn a percentage of a frozen estate because the estate was ironclad. But men like Vance did not walk away empty-handed. They monetized desperation. He marched up to my father. Thomas looked at the lawyer with utter contempt. "Get off this property," Thomas snarled. "You failed. You are useless." Vance did not flinch. He thrust the yellow paper directly into my father's chest, forcing Thomas to grab it. "I drafted an emergency petition," Vance said, his tone sharp and transactional. "I canceled my afternoon appointments. I drove to Newport to serve an injunction. The fact that your mother outsmarted you does not invalidate my billable hours." Thomas looked down at the yellow paper. His jaw slackened. "What is this?" he demanded. "That is my invoice," Vance replied. $15,000. It covers the expedited drafting fee, the emergency court filing retaining cost, and my physical appearance today. Payable immediately. $15,000. Thomas shouted, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "Are you out of your mind? I am not paying you a single cent. You did nothing." "You tucked your tail and ran," the second Harrison opened his briefcase. "You signed a retainer agreement in the coffee shop this morning," Vance countered. "Read the fine print, Mr. Orla. Contingency applies to the settlement. Emergency legal services are billed hourly at a premium rate. If you do not wire that money into my firm account by tomorrow morning, I will send it to a relentless collections agency. I will place a lien on your primary residence in Providence. I will ruin your credit score before the weekend." Thomas crumpled the yellow invoice in his fist. He was a man who prided himself on controlling every financial negotiation. Now he was being extorted by a bottom-feeding lawyer in the driveway of a house he could not touch. He was paying an exorbitant penalty for his own greed. "Have a pleasant afternoon," Vance said, offering a smug, humorless smile. He turned his back on my father, climbed into his compact car, and drove away for the final time, leaving a cloud of gray dust in his wake. The structural collapse of the Orla family was now complete. The facade of aristocratic superiority splintered into jagged, unfixable pieces. Thomas pivoted toward Cassandra. The financial penalty served as the final catalyst for his rage. He pointed a trembling finger at the daughter kneeling in the gravel. "This is your fault," he roared. "You threw away a fortune. You let your temper dictate your actions, and you cost us everything. I have to pay $15,000 for a useless lawyer because you could not bother to read a recipe card." Cassandra looked up at him. Her face was streaked with dark tears. "Do not blame me," she cried, her voice cracking. "You raised me to expect the best. You told me the house would be mine. You enabled this. You are 31 years old," Thomas snapped, his voice devoid of any paternal affection. "You are a grown woman acting like a spoiled child. You threw a wooden box into a puddle because you thought it was beneath you. You are a fool." I stood on the wide wooden porch, watching the disintegration. Harrison Cole stood quietly beside me, a silent witness to the carnage. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in grease from the intricate lock of the brass box. I dug through the dust of history to claim my future. I looked at Cassandra. The contrast was poetic. She wore a burgundy blazer that cost more than my first car, but the expensive fabric was ruined. Dark brown stains from the great swamp coated her sleeves. Her designer shoes were caked in dried mud. Her immaculate makeup was destroyed. Thick black mascara ran down her cheeks in jagged rivers. She looked exactly like what she was, a hollow shell stripped of its unearned polish. Evelyn finally found her voice. "Thomas, please," she begged, pulling at his arm. "Stop yelling at her. People will hear you." "There is nobody around to hear us," Evelyn Thomas sneered, shaking off her hand. "We are standing in the middle of nowhere, paying for her stupidity." Cassandra ignored them both. Desperation took hold of her. She unlocked the device and opened her web browser. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. She typed furiously, making multiple errors and deleting them. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked, her voice thick with concern. "I am fixing this," Cassandra muttered. She tapped the screen and pressed the phone to her ear. She listened to the ringing tone, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Hello?" she said, her voice pitching high with panic. "Yes, I need to speak to a dispatch manager. This is an absolute emergency." Thomas stared at her. "Who are you calling?" Cassandra held up a hand, silencing him. "Yes, I am still here," she said into the receiver. "I am trying to locate a specific sanitation route, a commercial dumpster. It was located behind the historic granite church on Elmwood Avenue in Providence." I watched my sister descend into total indignity. She was calling the city sanitation department. "Listen to me," Cassandra pleaded, tears spilling fresh over her mud-stained cheeks. "I need to know when that particular dumpster was emptied." "Tuesday afternoon." "Yes, the day of the funeral. Please, you have to tell me where the truck went." "Which landfill?" The operator on the other end of the line clearly offered a confusing or dismissive response. Cassandra let out a loud, tragic sob. "You do not understand," she cried, dropping her forehead into her free hand. "There is $250,000 in that trash. It is a wooden box. I threw it in the garbage. I need to go dig it out. Tell me where the trash goes. Please, I will pay you. I will come down there and search the piles myself. Just tell me where the trucks dumped the garbage." She was begging a tired municipal worker for permission to wade through mountains of rotting garbage. The golden child of the Orla family, the woman who refused to learn how to cook because it was beneath her station, was now sobbing on her knees, offering to dig through a city landfill with her bare hands. It was the ultimate payoff. The universe had delivered a flawless sentence. Beatrice Orla had not just protected her wealth, she had forced her greedy descendants to reveal their true nature to the world and to themselves. I turned away from the spectacle. I had seen enough. The cold coastal wind whipped my hair across my face. I looked at Harrison Cole. He offered a slow, respectful nod. I reached out and turned the brass knob of the heavy oak door. I stepped inside the warm, quiet foyer of my new home, leaving the noise and the ruin outside where it belonged. Exactly 7 days passed since the chaotic scene on the gravel driveway in Newport. For one entire week, I remained inside the coastal colonial home. I spent my mornings drinking hot tea on the wide wraparound porch, watching the Atlantic Ocean crash against the jagged shoreline. I spent my afternoons converting the grand study overlooking the water into the headquarters for my new archival consulting business. I filed the legal paperwork, transferred the utilities into my name, and changed every single antique lock on the property. I built a fortress of quiet independence. During those 7 days, my cell phone served as a relentless reminder of the wreckage I left behind. I received countless voicemails, text messages, and lengthy emails from both Thomas and Evelyn. The messages shifted in tone as the days progressed. At first, they were defensive. Then, they became desperate. Finally, they settled into a pathetic, pleading rhythm. They wanted to talk. They wanted to explain. They wanted to fix things. I ignored every single notification until I felt ready to dictate the terms of our engagement. When I decided to reply, I sent a short message containing a single location and a specific time. A small, independent coffee shop located on the east side of Providence, 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon. I chose this location deliberately. It was neutral ground. It was a public, busy space filled with university students and local professionals where my parents could not yell and could not cause a dramatic scene. The autumn weather had turned sharp and crisp. Brown and gold leaves scraped against the concrete sidewalks driven by a brisk wind. I parked my car and walked toward the cafe. I pulled my wool coat tight against the chill. I pushed through the heavy glass doors. The interior smelled rich and comforting, a blend of roasted espresso beans, melting butter, and warm cinnamon pastries. The ambient noise of grinding coffee machines and low conversations provided a steady hum of normal life. I spotted them immediately. Thomas and Evelyn occupied a small circular table near the back corner of the room. They looked fundamentally altered. The arrogant, impenetrable armor my father usually wore had evaporated. He wore a simple, faded gray sweater, lacking his usual crisp, tailored suit jacket. His posture was terrible. His shoulders slumped forward. He looked older, smaller, diminished by the sheer weight of his recent financial penalties and social failures. He was no longer the imposing corporate titan. He was just a tired man who had backed the wrong horse. Evelyn sat beside him looking pale and remarkably fragile. She had abandoned her expensive country club jewelry. She clutched a paper coffee cup with both hands, leaning over the table as if drawing physical warmth from the cardboard. She stared blankly at the wood grain. I walked over. I did not take off my coat. I pulled out the metal chair across from them, but I did not settle into it. I perched on the very edge, maintaining a rigid posture that signaled I was not planning to stay for a casual chat. Thomas looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed and shadowed with dark circles, indicating a severe lack of sleep. He offered a weak, tentative smile that did not reach his eyes. "Minerva," he said, his voice lacking its typical booming authority. "Thank you for agreeing to see us. We ordered a drink for you, a vanilla latte. We thought you might want something warm." I looked at the paper cup sitting on the table in front of my chair. It was a pathetic, tragic gesture. 28 years of treating me like an invisible burden, and he thought a sugary $4 beverage would act as a sufficient olive branch. I drank black coffee. I had consumed my coffee black since my freshman year of college. He did not know that trivial detail because he had never bothered to learn anything genuine about my life. "I do not drink vanilla," I said, keeping my tone even and flat. "And I am not staying here long enough to drink anything at all. You requested this meeting, Thomas. Speak." Evelyn flinched at my direct, icy tone. She leaned forward, her eyes already swimming with unshed tears. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "we are so deeply sorry. This entire week has been a profound nightmare for us. We lost our way. We let the stress of the funeral and the shock of your grandmother will cloud our judgment. We want to put this ugly chapter behind us. We want our family back together." Thomas nodded, eagerly grasping at her sentimental rhetoric. "Yes, Minerva, your mother is exactly right. We made terrible mistakes. We handled the situation poorly, and we let our emotions dictate our actions. But we are blood. We need to move forward as a unit. We would love to drive down to Newport this weekend. We could bring a nice dinner. We could sit on your beautiful porch and talk things through. We can heal together." There it was, the inevitable, transparent pivot. They masked their lingering entitlement with soft words about healing and family bonds. They still wanted access to the coastal mansion. They still wanted to step foot onto the $1 million property and pretend they belonged there. They thought they could sweep 30 years of toxic, enabling behavior under the rug with a single hollow apology and a suggestion for a scenic weekend getaway. I looked at the man who had hired a sleazy lawyer to freeze my bank accounts. I looked at the woman who had watched my sister tear my apartment apart without saying a single word to stop her. I remembered every holiday where I was shoved to the corner while Cassandra received lavish praise for simply existing. I remembered the wet parking lot where they demanded I surrender my inheritance just to pacify a tantrum. Healing does not happen simply because you say you are sorry after you lose a war, I said. My voice was low, but it cut cleanly through the ambient noise of the cafe. Silence is not an apology. And biology is not a free pass to treat me like collateral damage. Thomas opened his mouth, likely preparing to launch into a defensive corporate negotiation tactic, but I held up my hand, stopping him instantly. He closed his mouth. "You do not get to rewrite history because you are currently embarrassed," I continued. "For 28 years, you engineered and enabled an abusive dynamic. You elevated the vanity of Cassandra over my basic humanity. You treated my archival passions as trivial hobbies, while you funded her endless delusions. You let her destroy my property. You tried to steal my legal inheritance. And you placed a magnetic tracking device in my coat pocket like a common criminal." Evelyn let out a choked, agonizing sob, hiding her face in her trembling hands. "I'm going to make my boundaries incredibly clear," I stated, ensuring every single word landed with surgical precision. "You are never stepping foot on the Newport property. Not for upcoming holidays, not for weekend dinners, not for a casual summer visit. That house is my sanctuary. It is a fortress built specifically to keep people like you outside. You lost your privileges to my life the moment you sided with her in that law office." Thomas stared at me, his jaw tight, but he did not argue. The fight had been thoroughly beaten out of him. The $15,000 invoice from Richard Vance had drained his remaining resilience. "If you want any kind of relationship with me moving forward, it will not happen over coffee," I told them, leaning slightly closer to ensure the finality of my words registered. "It will only happen in a professional, clinical setting. You will enter family therapy. You will sit across from a licensed, demanding professional, and you will acknowledge 28 years of enabling abuse. You will admit exactly what you did. You will unpack exactly why you did it. If you refuse to do that hard, uncomfortable work, do not ever contact me again." I checked my wristwatch. Exactly 3 minutes had passed since I pulled the metal chair back. I stood up. The harsh scrape of the chair legs against the floor sounded like a wooden gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. "The choice is yours," I said. "Do the work or lose your remaining daughter." I turned and walked toward the cafe exit. I did not look back. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the crisp autumn afternoon. Behind me, my parents remained frozen at the small circular table, staring at a cold vanilla latte and the devastating, permanent reality of their own choices. The heavy, suffocating weight of the past 3 decades lifted from my shoulders, leaving me lighter, stronger, and entirely free. 6 months. The Atlantic Ocean grew darker, taking on a sharp, slate-gray hue that mirrored the stone cliffs. I spent those 6 months breathing life back into the Newport estate. I did not hire a massive crew of contractors to erase the history of the house. I wanted to feel the physical labor of claiming my space. I spent weeks on my hands and knees polishing the original wide plank pine floorboards until they gleamed warm and rich under the afternoon sun. The house slowly woke up. It no longer felt like a hidden secret locked away in a bank vault. It felt like a home. I converted the grand study on the first floor into my professional headquarters. The room featured tall windows that faced the crashing ocean, providing a constant, rhythmic soundtrack of waves hitting the seawall. I lined the walls with floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves. I placed a heavy antique desk in the center of the room. I officially launched Orla Archival Consulting. Without the suffocating weight of my family constantly demanding my submission, my career flourished. Private collectors, historical societies, and regional museums contracted me to restore and authenticate their colonial documents. The very skill set my sister mocked the dusty books and faded ink now funded the preservation of my coastal estate. I kept Grandma Beatrice's hand-drawn map, the intricate colonial puzzle that changed my destiny, was framed in dark walnut and hung prominently above the stone fireplace. It served as a daily reminder of the gauntlet I survived. My parents, Thomas and Evelyn, remained a distant, quiet reality. They actually attended the therapy sessions I demanded. I received a brief, formal email from a licensed counselor in Providence confirming their enrollment and consistent attendance. I did not reply. I did not rush to invite them down for Thanksgiving. Healing requires more than a few hours on a couch. It requires a sustained, structural change in behavior. The boundary I drew at the coffee shop held firm. The heavy oak door of my house remained locked to them. Perhaps Cassandra experienced a very different trajectory. Her unearned, arrogant lifestyle required a constant influx of cash. Without Thomas willing to fund her vanity, and without the $250,000 inheritance she threw into the garbage, her financial reality collapsed. She had drained her savings account paying upfront for the Great Swamp Guides. Those guides also sent her a substantial bill for hazardous retrieval and damaged equipment after pulling her out of the deep mud. She had maxed out her luxury credit cards anticipating a massive payout that never arrived. The debt collectors began calling. With no practical skills and a terrible reputation in the local real estate market, Cassandra was forced to find immediate employment. She needed a job that required no specialized degree but relied heavily on public speaking. The local tourism industry provided her only viable lifeline. She took Cassandra, the woman who despised history, the woman who insulted our grandmother for holding on to old traditions, was now forced to memorize colonial facts to earn her hourly wage. She had to learn the exact dates of maritime battles. She had to memorize the architectural details of the historic mansions she would never own. And worse, she had to wear the uniform. Every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, I took a break from my archival work to walk down my long gravel driveway and check the mail. And every Tuesday and Thursday, the Newport Historical Trolley rattled down Ocean Drive. The first time I saw her, I almost did not believe it. The trolley was painted bright red and gold, filled with out-of-town tourists holding cameras and melting ice cream cones. Cassandra stood at the front of the open-air carriage holding a microphone. She was wearing a heavy, itchy colonial-era dress, complete with a ruffled bonnet and a thick wool shawl. Her designer blazers and expensive heels were gone, replaced by cheap theatrical polyester and sensible walking shoes. The performative corporate cheerfulness she used to command rooms was entirely depleted. On your left, you will see the hidden entrances to some of Newport's oldest private estates, she recited over the loudspeaker, reading from a laminated script. These colonial homes were built by maritime merchants and have been preserved by generations of careful historical stewardship. The trolley rolled slowly past my wrought iron gates. I stood near the stone pillar holding a stack of mail. I wore a comfortable woven sweater and a pair of worn denim jeans, standing on the lush green lawn of my $1 million property. Cassandra turned her head. She saw me. The microphone dipped slightly in her hand. Her voice faltered over the speaker, cutting out for a brief second of dead air. We made direct eye contact through the iron bars of the gate. I saw the dark circles under her eyes. I saw the flush of deep, inescapable shame creep up her neck, painting her cheeks red beneath the ruffled edge of her colonial bonnet. She was pointing out the generational wealth of the coastline to a crowd of strangers, forced to literally drive past the fortune she threw away. I did not smile. I did not wave. I did not offer a smug, victorious smirk. I simply stood on my own land, grounded and immovable. I watched her lower her gaze back to her laminated script. The ocean breeze caught the fallen autumn leaves, swirling them in a golden arc across the front porch. I stepped inside the warm, quiet foyer and closed the heavy oak door. I walked into the study and stood in front of the fireplace, looking up at the framed map. I thought about the name Grandma Beatrice gave me when I was born, Minerva Orla. Minerva, the ancient goddess of wisdom, of strategic warfare, and quiet strength. Orla, the Celtic word for golden princess. For 28 years, my family treated me like dirt. They tried to bury me under their expectations and their demands. They thought I was invisible. But Beatrice saw the truth. She knew the name was not just a label, it was a prophecy. She did not just leave me a house on the water. She did not just leave me a hidden bank account or a clever riddle. She gave me a gauntlet to run. She forced me to stand up to my father. She forced me to outsmart my sister. She forced me to draw a line in the sand and defend my own worth. Grandma Beatrice left me the exact blueprint required to build my own spine. I ran my fingers over the smooth edge of the heavy brass box resting on my desk. The metal was cold, but the legacy it contained was enduring. The quiet, invisible daughter was gone. In her place stood the architect of a new beginning. If you are listening to this and you see yourself in my story, I want you to remember something. If they tell you you are invisible, let them look away. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe they hold all the power. Their arrogance is a distraction, and their ignorance is your greatest advantage. Do not waste your breath screaming to be seen by people who choose to be blind. Use the silence. Use the space they leave behind. It gives you more time to build your empire.
There is a profound, often unspoken truth that echoes through the hallways of the modern American home. The children who demand the most attention are rarely the ones who actually need it. And the children who ask for nothing are often the ones carrying the heaviest burdens. When we look at the story of Minerva Orla, a tale of hidden treasure, colonial maps, and a fractured family in Rhode Island, we might initially see a thrilling mystery. But strip away the brass boxes and the invisible ink, and what remains is a stark, haunting mirror held up to our own living rooms. It is a story that asks us to examine the very foundation of our parenting, the weight of our family responsibilities, and the legacies we are truly passing down to the next generation. In today's culture, there is an immense, crushing pressure on parents to be the architects of their children's happiness. We want to smooth the path, eliminate the obstacles, and ensure our kids never feel the sting of disappointment. But as we see in Minerva's parents, Thomas and Evelyn, the desperate desire to keep the peace can inadvertently build a prison of entitlement. By constantly catering to Cassandra's loud demands, by enabling her narcissism and shielding her from the natural consequences of her actions, they did not protect her, they crippled her. They fed into a dangerous narrative where validation is expected simply for existing, a distorted extension of the participation trophy culture. When we refuse to let our children fail, when we prioritize harmony over honesty and fairness, we raise adults who cannot navigate the inevitable storms of the real world without demanding that the rain simply stop falling on them. This is where Grandmother Beatrice emerges not just as a clever matriarch, but as the ultimate teacher of traditional family values. Beatrice understood a fundamental principle that seems to be slipping away in our fast-paced, image-obsessed society. An inheritance, whether it is money, land, or a family name, should be a reflection of character, not merely a biological right. The true tragedy of Cassandra was not that she lost $1 million coastal estate. It was that she looked at a worn, wooden box of her grandmother's cooking recipes and saw only garbage. In her vanity, she missed the profound cultural symbolism of that box. The morality clause tied to those recipes was Beatrice's final, desperate attempt to teach her eldest granddaughter that traditional domestic skills and family rituals are not outdated, meaningless chores. They are the sacred repositories of our history. Cooking a meal for the family, sitting around a table, sharing the stories woven into the very fabric of those recipe cards. These are the acts that keep a family's legacy alive. Cassandra threw away a trigger for a $200,000 fund because she refused to see the hidden value in tradition. It is a sobering reminder for all of us raising children. If we do not teach them to value the quiet, humble acts of service and emotional connection, we are leaving them spiritually bankrupt, regardless of what sits in their bank accounts. But there is a brilliant, piercing light in this story, and it shines through Minerva. For the young people listening, for the ones who feel overshadowed by louder siblings or ignored by a society that prizes performative confidence over quiet competence, Minerva is a beacon. Her journey from the invisible help to the wise golden princess is a testament to the power of self-defined worth. Minerva did not wait for her parents to see her. She did not beg for the spotlight. Instead, she took her grandmother's advice to heart. While the loud seagulls fight for scraps on the pier, the wise must learn to dive for the pearls. Minerva used her time in the shadows to educate herself. Her success was not a lottery ticket. It was the direct, undeniable result of her intellectual curiosity and her expertise as a historical archivist. When she used a UV light pen to reveal the encrypted colonial ink on that parchment map, she proved that education, knowledge, and a deep understanding of one's own heritage are the truest keys to unlocking the world's opportunities. Her name itself, referencing the goddess of wisdom, reinforces the idea that the ultimate goal of youth development should be the cultivation of intelligence and discernment. She teaches us that in an era of instant gratification, patience, persistence, and doing the hard work behind the scenes will always outlast the superficial demands of the greedy. Yet, wisdom often comes with a painful price. To step into her power, Minerva had to learn the hardest lesson of adulthood. Biology is not a free pass for abuse. The concept of family responsibility does not mean setting yourself on fire to keep your relatives warm. By setting hard, immovable boundaries with her parents, by refusing to let them back into her life without acknowledging their decades of enabling behavior, Minerva demonstrated true emotional resilience. It is a heartbreaking but necessary realization for many. Sometimes, protecting your peace means closing the door on the very people who were supposed to protect you. It is a heavy burden, but it is the only way to break generational cycles of toxicity and ensure that the family you eventually build is rooted in fairness, honesty, and emotional awareness. Stories like Minerva's remind us that our family dynamics are written in ink that we can either let fade or choose to rewrite. If this exploration of family, boundaries, and the quiet triumph of the underdog resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe and follow our channel. Sophia Told Stories. We explore the deep, often hidden narratives that shape our lives, and your support helps us continue to bring these powerful reflections to light. Join our community, and let's keep uncovering the truth together. As the coastal winds of Rhode Island sweep across the historic lighthouses and the ancient, brick-lined streets of Providence, the dust settles on the Orla family legacy. We are left looking at the two divergent paths of two very different sisters, one who demanded the world and ended up with nothing, and one who asked for nothing and inherited an empire. But as you turn away from this story, look closely at your own reflection. Look at the children in your home, the siblings at your dining table, or the parents you call on holidays. What are the unspoken rules in your living room? Who is being enabled, and who is being slowly rendered invisible? We spend our entire lives building wealth, acquiring property, and planning for the future, but perhaps the most vital question remains unanswered until it is far too late. When the time comes to pass down the keys to your kingdom, will your children recognize the value of the map you left behind? Or will they throw the most precious parts of your history out into the rain? The answer, much like the ink on an old colonial parchment, is already written there, waiting for the right light to reveal it.